The Ozark Mountains are filled with valleys and ridges where time seems to stop, but none carried more whispers than Hensley Hollow. By the early 1960s, when the rest of America was buzzing with rock and roll, television, and civil rights marches, the people of the Ozarks still told children not to go near that place. Parents warned, "If you hear voices singing from the woods, don't look back." Just Run hunters claimed their dogs refused to go near the hollow, whining and pulling at their leashes. Old folks spoke of strange lights at night, like lanterns floating through the trees. But the strangest thing was this: no map, no county record, no history book ever mentioned the Hensley Hollow or the sisters who once lived there. It was as if someone wanted to erase them. Yet their story lingered in every hushed conversation and every fireside tale. In 1964, when a boy named Thomas Green first heard the tale from his grandmother, he laughed and asked why no one ever wrote it down. Her face turned pale as ash. "Because some stories, Tommy," she whispered, "ain't meant to be remembered. They're meant to be buried." But buried stories have a way of clawing back to the surface. The story began decades earlier in the 1920s, with two girls born to a poor farming family, Clara and June Hensley. Clara was older by 3 years, with striking dark hair and eyes that held a sharpness beyond her age. She was bold, stubborn, and quick to speak her mind. June, in contrast, was soft-spoken, with pale hair and gentle eyes. But though different in temperament, they were bound by an unshakable love. Neighbors used to say the sisters were two sides of one coin. Clara protected June fiercely, often stepping into fights or arguments on her behalf. June balanced Clara's fire with her quiet patience. But life in the Ozarks was hard. The Hensleys' farm yielded little, and poverty hung heavy on the family. Still, the girls found joy in each other's company, singing in the fields, sharing secrets under starlight. That bond, that fierce togetherness, would become the source of both their strength and their downfall. In the summer of 1932, when Clara was 12 and June only 9, disaster struck. A wildfire, sparked by lightning, spread across the valley. The dry land burned like tinder. The girls woke to smoke filling their home, their parents screaming for them to run. Clara dragged June into the night, choking on ash as flames devoured the farmhouse. But when they looked back, they saw their mother and father trapped inside, swallowed by fire. By dawn, nothing remained but smoldering ruins and 2 orphans with nowhere to go. That night, Clara looked at the blackened sky and whispered a promise. "If God won't protect us, I'll find something that will." June, trembling beside her, didn't speak. But her wide eyes told of a fear that would never leave her. The people of the town offered little help. A few left food, but most kept their distance. The sisters were now outsiders, girls marked by tragedy. And in grief, Clara began to wonder if something beyond the ordinary could keep them safe. It was after the fire that people began to notice strange things. The sisters, it was said, visited Miss Opal, a reclusive old woman who lived deep in the woods. Some called her a healer, others a witch. At night, farmers swore they saw Clara and June burying jars in the soil beneath the moonlight, their hands clasped, their voices humming strange songs. By the next spring, the sisters' garden flourished unnaturally. Tomatoes grew larger than a man's fist, beans twisted around fence posts, and herbs thrived in poor soil. But blessings were mixed with curses. Livestock near the Hensley land sickened. A calf was born with twisted legs. Dogs howled without reason. Whispers spread. They made a pact with the old ways. The Hensleys are marked. Clara ignored the gossip. June, however, felt its weight, carrying guilt like a stone in her chest. She begged Clara to stop their midnight rituals. But Clara's answer was always the same. "We've got no one else. We only have each other, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe." The whispers turned into fear in 1936, when tragedy touched another family. Samuel Lee, a boy of 14, vanished while cutting through the Hensley property on his way home. For 2 days, the town searched. On the third, they found him by the creek, his face pale, his lips tinged blue, though no wound marked his body. The doctor could not explain it. There was no sign of drowning, no illness, no struggle. Just a boy lying still, as if the life had been quietly taken from him. Neighbors began to mutter. Samuel had been seen taunting the sisters weeks before, throwing rocks at their chickens. Now he was gone. The whispers grew into certainty. The Hensley sisters took him. From then on, Clara and June lived under suspicion. No church welcomed them. Storekeepers refused to sell to them. Children followed them in the street, chanting cruel rhymes. Hensley witches, Hensley curse. Talk to them, and you'll end up worse. Clara lifted her chin against the insults, her eyes burning with fury. She dared anyone to step closer. June, though, wilted under the cruelty. Nights found her weeping softly while Clara whispered promises of protection. Their isolation deepened. With no community, no church, no school willing to have them, they had only each other. And though Clara insisted they didn't need anyone else, the anger in her heart grew darker. The town had made its decision. The Hensleys were no longer neighbors. They were outcasts. In 1940, a traveling preacher stopped in town. He was a tall, thin man with piercing blue eyes, claiming to have seen curses broken in other places. He warned the townsfolk, "A curse feeds on hatred. If you cast out these sisters, you give darkness a place to grow." Some listened politely, others laughed. Clara met him once at the edge of town. He told her gently, "You and your sister carry sorrow, but sorrow needn't be a chain. Don't let bitterness bind you." Clara scoffed, saying, "We don't need your pity, preacher. We've survived without anyone." But June lingered behind, her eyes brimming. She whispered a soft thank you before hurrying back to her sister. When the preacher left, so did the last voice of compassion the sisters might have heard. When World War II arrived, nearly every young man in the Ozarks left for battle. Mothers prayed, but many never saw their sons again. As telegrams of death arrived, grief swept through the valley. Yet the whispers persisted. Our boys are dying because of them. It's the curse. The Hensleys brought this. The sisters had no part in the war, yet they became its scapegoats. Mothers who had once pitied them now spat in the dirt at their passing. Clara and June retreated further into their hollow, raising gardens, tending chickens, surviving as they always had, together, alone. But grief hung over them like smoke. The world was burning far away, yet hatred in their own town burned just as fiercely. By 1947, young boys in town had turned the Hensleys into a kind of cruel entertainment. One night, a group of teenagers dared each other to go to the sisters' cabin. They shouted insults, threw stones, and finally set fire to a chicken coop. The sisters fought back with shouts and curses, Clara waving a lantern while June begged them to leave. The boys laughed as they fled into the woods, but by dawn, 2 of them were found wandering near the creek, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. They could not speak a word. Not that day, not ever again. The town grew cold with fear. Mothers clutched their children tighter, and the legend of the Hensley curse rooted itself deeper. The weight of it all crushed June slowly. She could not bear the stares, the whispers, the never-ending suspicion. Unlike Clara, who met hatred with defiance, June's gentle spirit broke under its weight. In 1951, during a thunderstorm, June vanished. Some said she walked into the creek and never came out. Others claimed she fled to another town, finally escaping her sister's shadow. Clara offered no explanation. When asked, she simply said, "My sister isn't gone. She's here. Always." But when neighbors passed the hollow at night, they swore they still heard 2 voices singing in the dark. One strong, one trembling. Whether June was dead, missing, or something else entirely, no one could say. But from then on, Clara lived alone, and the story of the Hensley sisters grew even darker. After June's disappearance in 1951, Clara Hensley became a ghost of herself. She rarely came to town. When she did, her white dress looked tattered, her hands dirt-stained, her face set in stone. People watched her from a distance, whispering. Children dared each other to leave notes or dead flowers on her porch, running off into the woods before she emerged. Hunters swore they saw her wandering with a lantern at night, mumbling to someone unseen. But the strangest thing was the sound. On still nights, when the wind carried just right, neighbors claimed they heard two voices singing from the hollow, Clara's sharp tones joined by another, softer, trembling one. How could she sing with June, the townsfolk wondered, if June was gone? Some believed Clara had gone mad, her grief birthing an illusion of her sister's presence. Others were sure June's spirit remained, tethered to Clara by their unnatural bond. Either way, Clara was never truly alone. The hollow held secrets too heavy for one soul to carry. By the summer of 1964, the Hensley Hollow story had faded from the lips of the young, replaced by talk of television, the Beatles, and far-off cities. But Thomas Green, a restless 14-year-old, wasn't like the other boys. He loved exploring the woods, chasing mysteries, and daring the boundaries of old tales. One night, while sitting on his grandmother's porch, he asked her about the Hensley sisters. She grew pale, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Those girls were cursed, Tommy. Best leave them in peace." But Thomas couldn't resist. He boasted to his friends that he would go into Hensley Hollow himself. "I'll bring back proof," he said. "Maybe a trinket from the cabin. Maybe even talk to the witch herself." They laughed nervously, daring him. And so, armed with only a flashlight and his unshakable courage, Thomas set off into the woods. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The hollow was eerily quiet when Thomas entered. Birds ceased singing. Even the cicadas hushed. His flashlight beam bounced between gnarled trees, leading him to a crooked cabin hidden among brush and vines. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. The door creaked open at his knock, and there she was, Clara Hensley, now old, her hair long and white, her eyes still sharp as knives. She didn't flinch at the boy's boldness. Instead, she studied him, her lips curling in a faint smile. "Why have you come here, boy?" Thomas swallowed his fear. "I want to know the truth. About the curse. About June. About you." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. Then she motioned him inside. The cabin smelled of herbs and smoke. Jars lined the shelves, filled with dried plants, feathers, and small bones. In the corner sat two rocking chairs, one worn with age, the other strangely untouched. Clara's voice cracked as she whispered, "Sit. If you want the truth, you'll hear it. But truth ain't what they told you." Clara poured the boy a cup of bitter tea and spoke. She told him how she and June had been orphaned, how the town had turned on them after the fire, after Samuel's death, after every misfortune that befell their neighbors. "They needed monsters," Clara said. "And we were easy to blame." She admitted that she had learned things from Miss Opal, herbs to heal, charms to protect, but never curses, never death. Her voice softened when she spoke of June. "She was the best part of me. Gentle, kind. They broke her with their hate, Thomas. She didn't run away. She died here in this hollow, and I've kept her with me ever since." Thomas's skin prickled. He wanted to ask how June could still be heard, but Clara's eyes silenced him. "The curse isn't mine, boy," she said bitterly. "It's theirs. Hatred is the real curse. Remember that." Thomas wasn't sure whether to believe her, but something in her tired eyes unsettled him in ways the town's stories never had. That night, unable to resist his curiosity, Thomas hid near the creek with his flashlight off. At midnight, he saw Clara emerge, carrying a lantern. She moved slowly, speaking in soft tones, as though addressing someone beside her. And then, Thomas froze. Another figure stood at her side, a pale young woman, her hair long and fair. She made no sound, but her presence was undeniable. Clara tilted her head as if listening to her reply. Thomas's breath caught. It was June, or what was left of her. He stumbled backward, snapping a twig. Clara's head whipped around, lantern light flashing. Thomas bolted into the woods, heart pounding, until he reached the safety of town. When he told his friends and family what he'd seen, fear swept through the community like wildfire. Thomas's tale rekindled the town's old fears. By morning, whispers filled the streets. By nightfall, men were gathering with rifles and torches. "Witchcraft," they muttered. "Ghosts walking. It's not natural. It's not right." The sheriff half-heartedly tried to stop them, but the mob's anger was louder than reason. To them, Clara had been a curse on their valley for decades. Thomas's story was the final straw. Clara, old and frail, sat rocking on her porch when the men arrived. She didn't fight. She didn't beg. She only looked at them with weary eyes. "You can burn my home," she said quietly, "but you'll never bury the truth." The mob stormed forward anyway. Torches were thrown. Flames roared. And in the smoke and crackle of fire, witnesses swore they heard two voices singing, a harmony of sorrow and defiance, as the cabin burned to the ground. By dawn, nothing remained but ashes. The men returned home victorious, claiming they had ended the curse. But unease soon replaced their triumph. For weeks afterward, strange things lingered. Livestock sickened. Children fell ill with fevers doctors couldn't explain. Hunters swore they heard women laughing in the woods. Lanterns were spotted floating through the trees where the cabin once stood. The people tried to brush it off as coincidence, but deep down, they knew. The fire had not cleansed anything. If anything, it had unleashed something worse. And Thomas? He carried a different weight. Guilt. He knew his story had stirred the mob. He had wanted adventure, proof, a tale to brag about. Instead, he had helped destroy a woman who may have only been guilty of grief. It was a burden that would never leave him. The hollow lay empty, but the town couldn't escape its shadow. Some children grew up terrified of the woods. Others dared each other to wander close, returning pale and shaken, whispering about voices that followed them. Old folks muttered that curses didn't end with fire. They carried through blood, through land, through memory. Thomas, meanwhile, grew into a young man with heavy eyes. He stopped boasting, stopped chasing adventure. Instead, he kept to himself, haunted by the vision of Clara holding her lantern, singing into the flames. He couldn't shake the thought. Had he really seen June's ghost, or had Clara's grief simply taken shape in the darkness? Either way, the town had chosen fear over compassion, and fear left scars. Years later, when Thomas was grown, he returned to Hensley Hollow. The cabin's ruins were overgrown with moss and ivy. Yet buried in the ashes, he found a rusted tin box. Inside were letters, written by June. They told of her fever in 1951, her slow decline, Clara's desperate attempts to heal her with herbs and prayers. One letter ended mid-sentence, her handwriting shaky and weak. June hadn't run away. She hadn't become a ghost. She had died of illness, and Clara, unable to accept it, had kept speaking to her, singing to her, as though she were still there. The ghost Thomas had seen was grief, a sister's refusal to let go. The so-called curse had been nothing but sorrow and the cruelty of neighbors who needed someone to blame. Thomas wept as he read June's final words. He realized the truth the town had never understood. The Hensley sisters had never been witches. They had been victims of tragedy, of rumor, of hatred. The real curse wasn't theirs. It belonged to the community that had turned fear into violence. Thomas carried their story with him for the rest of his life. Though history books never mentioned the Hensley sisters, he told their tale to anyone who would listen, not as monsters, but as two sisters who only ever had each other. And those who heard it walked away with a quiet lesson. The greatest curses aren't cast by spells or shadows. They are born when we forget compassion, when we let fear replace love. And in the lonely woods of the Ozarks, some say you can still hear them singing, not as a warning, but as a reminder.